We've looked at voicing triads. We said the most common way to voice a triad, like this, is going to be in an open voicing. 1, 5, 3. Now let's look at some seventh chords. There are a couple different primary kinds of seventh chords. We're not really going to get into diminished or half diminished seventh chords at this point. Those are going to be for a later time. But right now I want to look mostly at the minor 7 and the major 7 chords. A minor seventh chord is the most common. It's going to be written small m7 or min7. A minor 7 chord is just a minor triad plus a minor 7th. This would be a C minor 7 chord. You would voice this very similarly to the minor or the major triad. So a C minor triad would be like a 1, 5, 3. And so a C minor 7, you would do this 1, 5, 3, and put the 7 on top. You see about this voicing that's so pleasing. It's open. It's got 2/5 in it. It's just a nice open voicing that's not too close together. So that's the most common voicing for a minor 7th chord. A major 7th chord is written either big M7 or MAJ, more commonly MAJ7. That's simply going to be a major triad with the interval of a major 7th added. Almost there, right? So this would be a C major 7 chord. Now, this I actually typically tend to voice a little bit differently because unlike the minor 7th chord, this 7th really, the minor 7 chords generally function as actually the construction of the piece and the progression of the chords. But a major 7 chord we typically think of as just a coloration, just a richer version of a major triad. And so I'm typically going to voice those differently because if I voice a C major 7 chord this way, it has sort of an open feel. It's just not really the kind of sound I want to go for. So I would actually bury that major 7th close to my 1. See how that has it has kind of a colorful feel to it. And that's because this 7 is really just enriching the 1. It's got that interval of a minor second between it. You could voice it this way. You could do this. But those would be the ways that I would voice a major 7 chord. A major minor 7 chord is typically just written as 7. So for example, a G major minor 7 chord, like this, a major triad plus a minor 7th, would just be written as G7. Typically functions as the 5 chord, or the dominant, in a key. So in the key of C, you'd have the G major 7 chord. You see how I voiced it, opening up the 3rd. To 1. We actually don't use this chord at all in this style. The reason is, it's got a tritone in it. That tritone has a very particular sound that we try to avoid. It's not that there's anything wrong with it, of course, but it's just not a sound that's pleasing to our ear, and when we hear it, it feels out of place. So we actually avoid the major minor 7 chord entirely. We replace it with something else that I'll talk about in future videos. So primarily we're using the minor 7, the minor 7th chord, and the major 7th chords. And we're going to use these in a similar principle to the triads, and that is avoid stacking consecutive notes. In the triads, that was thirds. Avoid stacking consecutive thirds. But in the case of the 7th chords, simply avoid stacking consecutive notes. If I have an E minor 7 chord, open voicing, whereas if I could do this, but if I were to put this one here, it creates this kind of a muddy sort of sound that I don't necessarily want. So avoid stacking consecutive notes. Keep open voicings when possible. Okay, it's your turn. Try voicing the following triads, for starters. There's obviously lots of voicings that could work, but stick primarily to the 1, the 5, and the 3. Let's start with a C major triad. For all these, I'm going to double the root on top. Let's try an an F. Or up the octave. Now B flat. See that I'm avoiding any kind of, there's no rhythm implied, there's no context really, and I'm not decorating with any other kinds of notes yet. I'm simply learning the common default voicings. Now a G chord. Now an E minor chord. Now an A minor chord. Now try these seventh chords, generally following the 1, 5, 3, 7 voicing. Try an A minor 7 chord. Now D minor 7. Now an F major 7. You could voice it like this. You said that's not quite so common. And I would typically, again, I would bury that 7th in the middle next to the 1. B minor 7. B minor 7 would be B minor. That's my 7th. And finally, D major 7. Notice I left out the 3rd.